It's a new year, so what's been going on? It's been a while since we did a video on this channel, and obviously there have been some changes if you have a little look at the channel page. Around the end of 2021, I had a kind of plan for what I wanted to do, and there was like a lot of stuff going on in regards to work and family and all sorts of stuff, so I had to like really trim off a lot of things I wanted to achieve. But obviously when that happens, if you're a creative personality, this tends to happen all the time, is that if you're interested in something and you leave it a while, then usually your interests change or your plans change. Now, just generally as a human being, I feel like I'm in a constant change of flux, where how emotional I am on any particular day or week or month tends to change all the time, especially in response to sources of inspiration, how the motivation changes. Sometimes that's related to the people you're in contact with. But the end of 2021 was interesting because as we finished doing the NVIDIA sponsored series, which in part was a curious test to see how far I could push myself in terms of actually getting work done. I feel like that's a bit of a badge I can now hang up in my mental wall of achievement. I think it also had a strange, maybe not so positive effect on my mind and sense of reality. In a recent Blend and Nest episode, I talked about how when we went out to Florida as a family for Christmas and New Year, I encountered a new, quite interesting and quite freaky problem, which I believe the term used to describe it is derealization. However, that gets tied up quite often with depersonalization. And I don't think this is exactly the same thing. I think the lines are slightly blurred. Where while I was out there, the environment is so different to how I experienced life here. And it's been a couple of years since I've been out to Florida. A lot has happened in that time, like work has picked up. I've got a very specific routine now of how I work. But being out there is so different, and my sense of time became so skewed. Also, for some reason, this time going out there, I found it much more difficult to adapt to the new time zone. So I was definitely experiencing jet lag, but I didn't really take many steps to overcome it because I just accepted waking up early every day. But one of the kind of symptomatic problems was that my sense of time was completely skewed. So like we would do things on the day prior, and then while I'm sitting around, maybe on the computer I've got out there or just walking around doing whatever, I'd remember back to what we did yesterday, but it would feel like it was a week ago, like 1 or 2 weeks. Something that always tends to mess with your sense of time is your dreaming, your dreamscape, your REM sleep. And I feel like there's definitely something that gets skewed up, especially when you're jet lagged. But then there's also the aspect of time folding, which I think I might have talked about on this channel before, which is where your sense of time is not a constant and it's not the same for everyone. And it doesn't necessarily match up with reality. Like, I don't know if there is a specified pace that time advances, if that makes sense. We perceive time as moving at a certain pace, but I think to a certain degree, it's all a bit of an illusion. People always say stuff like, and there's always studies coming out about how kids see time slower, so that's why stuff feels really long. And then as you get older, it speeds up faster and faster. But I think a lot of that is to do with lifestyle changes and routine. As you get older, not much changes. When you're a kid, everything is always changing all of the time. Also, everything seems new, and your brain is adapting to new pathways. We're very abstract creatures, and I think that's the primary purpose of the neocortex, like the newest part of the brain. Multiple layers of neurons that really help in creating repeatable pathways so we can adapt and develop new skills. But I think that also ties in with memory quite a bit. I think that as we become more efficient at picking up skills and doing them on autopilot, I think we might also become more efficient at perceiving time, if that makes sense. Might sound a bit weird. But anyway, with the time folding aspect, what I mean is when you're sitting at a computer in your home, the same routine you do every day, and you're just working, time tends to compress because not much is changing. Only the stuff on your screen's changing. You don't need to pay attention to much else that's going on in your life. So when you're focused or maybe even enjoying yourself, it just speeds up, goes by, so it feels like it's compressed. Changing environment to something where things are changing all the time, it's definitely not part of your routine. Time expands again, or the sense of time. So that's why if you go out for the day, like with people and just do a bunch of random things, the day will feel usually longer than it would do if you're kind of sat at home doing the same thing every day. So I feel like there's a combination of things that lead to the derealization problem. There are more symptoms as well, which we'll talk about. But for the perception of time, I think it's those two things. So the routine change, the jet lag playing with how the brain's repairing itself while you sleep. Then also something that really didn't help was that because I had the computer out there, I'm constantly moving between two phases. Where I'm on the computer, I'm still working, so time is compressing. And then when I'm not on the computer, I'm like swimming, going out with family, doing other random activities, etc. So it's really expanding. So we're constantly going between these two states of compression and expansion. And I think that might also be confusing for the brain when it's trying to codify all that stuff to memory, long-term memory, having this weird fluctuation of like a sine wave going on, combined with all those other aspects. Another accompanying symptom to the derealization, the thing that really gives it its name, was that at certain points on certain days, I didn't feel like I existed, which sounds really weird. It's a weird thing to describe, where I could be doing any particular thing and I just didn't feel present. Like I felt like I was watching someone else through their eyes. Like I don't feel like I'm existing in this space. In a way, it was a little bit anxiety inducing, but anxiety is a bit of a vague term. There are several types of anxiety, I think, well, probably more like a spectrum. But there's a type of dread anxiety, which I think comes in combination quite a lot with medical anxiety, which I also experience a fair amount as well. But I've also experienced that type of anxiety when I've had a kind of chemically induced depression before, which is where you are aware that you are not feeling as you usually feel. And therefore something in your mind, something in your body, your brain, whatever, is picking up on it and now you're worrying. So that's what I call the dread anxiety. It's like you're aware that something is not normal and that's generating an anxiety problem. Now that sense of not existing, plus the completely skewed sense of time, having trouble remembering things that were going on, and just honestly not feeling like I was where I was, led me to do a bunch of, strange Google searches. I was starting to wonder whether this was like part of the early warning signs for like schizophrenia or something. But upon reading about this, it did calm my nerves, because I think I read that derealization is like the third most common mental health complaint. I don't know what website that was. And the person that wrote that put down that people that start experiencing this usually tend to worry that they're becoming schizophrenic. And I was like, okay, that's exactly what's going on. So I was like, okay, so this person's having the similar thing. Apparently it's very common. I'm not becoming schizophrenic, so it's fine. It's nice being able to find some reassuring stories and anecdotes like that, because it helps you kind of reevaluate your position from the third perspective, or the third person perspective rather. But another mental note I made to myself was that when reading up about why this effect starts happening was that a lot of people believe it's a defense mechanism or some kind of protection mechanism, and that it usually comes after moments of stress. Now, being stubborn as I am, I looked back and I thought, well, I've been doing a lot of work and I've been under quite a lot of stress, but it's all been under control and I've never had any issue like this before. Well, maybe I have, but only at certain moments, like very high anxiety moments for one reason or another, but not enough for those specific symptoms to flag up for me to go, aha, I don't feel like I actually exist in this world. However, a couple of days before eventually reaching that threshold where I was looking stuff up, there was a particularly stressful situation that happened. I won't go into detail about what it was, but it was just something where I was put into a very uncomfortable position, and it wasn't just me, it was other people in my family who were just suddenly put into an uncomfortable situation. I don't like being the center of attention when things like that happen, and in this case I was. So I had this moment of like extreme kind of cringy stress where I was trying to kind of, just block out reality. I feel like maybe that, in combination with all of the other factors, may have been some kind of trigger event which led up to that. But also, in the same blog post I was reading, that person also considered the possibility of migraines. Now, I am particularly prone to getting migraines, and this was again another thing I flagged up as being really interesting, because thinking back to, in particular, my visual migraines, which were the most prevalent probably during secondary school throughout my teenage years. The earliest warning sign for those migraines was not a headache, because I don't typically get headaches with migraines. It was a sudden emotional change as part of the aura, as they call it, which is a very simplified word to describe the other symptoms which accompany a migraine, like all the other things other than a headache. It does still annoy me a bit, having experienced such a wide range of migraine symptoms, that, people still don't necessarily understand that a migraine is not a headache. A headache is a symptom of a migraine. There are all kinds of symptom combinations you can have which would make up what a migraine is, that don't necessarily include having a headache. Any visual migraines I have where I go blind and experience the emotional change, as well as some other weird symptoms, and also the vestibular migraines, so the sense of balance going weird. I don't get any headaches with those. Those are like the very simple sensory migraines. The only ones where I do get the headaches are with the hemiplegic ones, which kind of makes sense because they're the stroke-like ones where half your body becomes, well, seemingly paralyzed, you lose coordination, you can't speak, and so on. Reading up about that blog post about derealization, it reminded me about those aura symptoms for the visual and the vestibular migraines. And apparently, again, migraines are things that can be caused by high stress events and situations. Although I don't think that's typically what causes my migraines. I think mine are much more chemically induced. And by chemically, I mean diet. But it was definitely worth thinking about. It was an interesting thing to experience, although I don't recommend it. Another aspect of the derealization which I didn't like was it was much more difficult to come out of daydreaming, in the way that I daydream a lot on a day-to-day basis anyway, because I have some kind of attention deficit problem. Never diagnosed, whatever, I've just built my life around it, just knowing that I have an attention issue. Becoming in and out of daydreams is always like a frictionless process. It's so easy, it's so quick, and I like living in my daydreams. You know, it's a much more emotionally interesting place to be when compared to just reality. And I feel like it's part of the ingredient to what makes me a creative person. But when you're in a state of deeply daydreaming, and you need to come back to your full awareness, so you need to take your body off of autopilot. Usually it's a very quick and snappy process, very easy. In fact, you don't even think about it, you just do it. When in the strongest moment of this derealization episode, I found myself really noticing the distance between daydreaming and conscious awareness, like first person awareness, I mean. So there's a definite expansion of time between being aware that you were daydreaming and coming out of it, and then actually convincing yourself to retake control of your body from an autopilot state. So I remember, and I brought this up in Blenderness as well, walking up the stairs at one particular point while daydreaming. About halfway up the stairs, I was like, okay, well, we're coming to the top of the stairs now. I should probably, take back control. It just took a while before I felt like I actually had agency over my limbs again, which sounds weird, and it probably is. It doesn't happen anymore. Now I'm back to normal again. But just to give you like a possible example, maybe even a bad description of what it felt like, I think that's, somewhat close. So memory problems, you can't remember everything, and the things you do remember feel like they happened at the wrong times. You have a sense that you don't exist, like you shouldn't be there, that just the world isn't real. And then also you have trouble transferring between like this autopilot daydreaming state and like an actual first person living in the moment awareness. I'm glad to say that hasn't really lasted, and coming back over here, back to my day-to-day life, I feel much more comfortable again. But it does make me think and wonder, has being stuck in this room, in this house, doing the same thing every single day changed my brain? And the answer to that is obviously yes. But has it changed it in the way that if I then went off to do something else, that I would start experiencing these episodes of derealization much more commonly? Is that going to be a problem for me in the future? And the answer is I don't know. However, I'm not sure that it will, because to get a bit deeper maybe into the psychology side of it, I've taken day trips into London for like celebrations, birthdays and stuff, and me and my family, we like doing a thing where we pick out a hotel that we haven't been to and then stay there for the night, and do some activities in the day, and that's always very fun. The times we've done that in 2021, I never had any strange sense of derealization like that. Maybe I wasn't there long enough for it to kick in. But I feel like part of it is that where I went in Florida exists in this weird space in my mind between familiar and new. Everywhere else we've been in 2021 has been a completely new environment, something that I cannot anticipate, something that I don't feel like I can fall into a daydream state around because it's all brand new. I need to be aware of it. You know how people say, and it's very, very true, that when you sleep in a hotel for the first time or a new environment, you never get a full night's sleep. There's always part of your brain that's awake because it's a new environment, and I feel like that's true. With Florida, it's been a couple of years since I've been there, and I've been going there for years because we've got a home out there. The environment I went is a place that I recognize. I know every corner of it. Everything is the same. The computer has never changed. It's just exactly the same. But it's been years, so I feel like being there, my brain might have been anticipating falling back into a familiarity routine because we recognize that environment from the past. And maybe that was a very confusing experience for it. Trying to do new things while also being in a very familiar environment. I wonder, and I haven't tested it, but if I just went to new places from now on, maybe I would never encounter that issue. And I have been trying to say that to my family, like, we're so familiar with this place, we've been coming here all this time, why don't we try new things? I think my brain is probably more geared towards having new experiences rather than living the same experiences over and over and over again. And that might be weird, kind of looking here and thinking, well, your bedroom, your work, life, you are doing the same experience over and over again. Well, not really, because I specifically choose always a different project, something that changes every single time I do a video. It's always constantly changing in terms of like intellectual engagement. I've always wondered why I have trouble going back to old projects. It always feels like there's a bit of a mental block there. Maybe this is part of the reason why. Maybe my brain is so vehemently against experiencing the same thing again that being put into an environment which forces me to experience the same thing again pushed me into a derealization state. I can't know that for certain unless I try and do it again and recreate the same conditions, but it's just an interesting thought, and it's something I haven't really properly considered until I've said it out loud, like even now. I did do the Big 5 personality test a while back, and I was exceptionally high in terms of like the percentile for openness to experience. And I think that does line up with a lot of what I do and a lot of how I've expressed myself online. I think my brain requires new stuff to happen all the time. Otherwise, I fall into a very weird, don't really want to say depressive, anxious, and maybe in extreme cases, derealization state. Saying things like this out loud on video is extremely helpful because even just talking about it now, I'm coming to revelations like that. You see, I didn't really consider before even starting recording this that situation that I'd experienced may be inherently connected to my approach to making content and how I select projects and how I change my mind. Me not going back to old projects seems to be quite an important problem for me. I feel like now, maybe having this amount of self-reflection, I could say that maybe the solution isn't telling myself that it's going back to old projects, it's how do we put a new twist on the old ones. So if I want to add updates to old projects, let me take what I have, but make something completely new with it. Like reformat it. Maybe if it's like a content pack like Modular Metals, for example, then I can just keep the version 1 there in case I accidentally break something while doing this. Twist it around, make something new, because I've been considering changes I can make to that, especially in terms of like displaying the different effects using a new shader slab object. And then once that's all packaged up, I can call that version 2. So it'll be more of a psychological change in thinking, where I should ideally feel like I'm treading new ground every time. It is weird and interesting considering one's own behavior, sense of self, emotionality. When I think about the idea of a routine never changing and a life never changing, in theory, that should be comfortable and that should be comforting. And I think I've had, daydreams about that before, maybe having a nice house of my own where I have a garden and everything is kept pristine and, very nice and samey. But in reality, looking at, I guess, the behavior of what I've been experiencing, that might end up being something like my worst nightmare. I think another problem that can come up with situations like that is that it's very easy to feel alone. A sense of loneliness in your intellectual and creative connection to reality, life, etc. If I'm going on a journey where I'm exploring new things, new studies, new interests, and trying to turn those into projects, generally over the years I've learned to enjoy this all by myself, and I haven't really needed any company to go along with that. But I do believe that at a point it becomes a lonely exercise. Humans are very social creatures. If you have nothing to share the discoveries you've made with, or no one rather, to share them with, then I feel like we can discover a sense of futility. I think again, these are things that I've already been subconsciously realizing but haven't really put out into words before. And this is probably why I've put so much effort into trying to cultivate creator spaces and connections with other creatives, so that we have emotional outlets to bounce things off. This might also be part of the reason why I get so irrationally annoyed, well, annoyed's putting it lightly, irrationally pissed off with other creators which try to tell other creators what they can and can't do. Because for me, maybe projecting my experience onto other people and expecting they're going through similar things themselves, if I'm going through my creative journey, experimenting with new things, discovering new interests, feeling an emotional connection to that, if someone else comes along and tries to tell me that I shouldn't be doing that, then I don't know what to think. Like, who are you for trying to dictate what I should do with my life? So I've always been very annoyed when I see people do that to others as well. Like, no, let them go on their journey. You may think you're the genius in your own life, right? But they're doing their own thing. You're only the protagonist of your own story. You're not the protagonist of the universe. Certainly not the protagonist of everyone else's lives. Thinking about change is an interesting thing, especially at this point in my life, because now we're at the precipice of moving to the new house. It's taken a while. I think we started back in August or September trying to get this house, and now it looks like we're right on the edge of exchanging contracts and then completing, hopefully in a couple of weeks. Again, I don't like setting anything in stone with words because that may all be subject to change. But I've been living in this house, in this room for practically 26 years, because I'll be 26 next month. All this talk about moving to new areas and engaging in new routines and differences and similarities gets me thinking. I have no idea what it's going to be like. I'm hoping it'll be an interesting and exciting change. I mean, everything's going to be fine, but you can't help but have a sense of anxiety. Am I going to be the same person coming out of that change? No, of course not. People change all the way throughout their lives. Another thing I think about is, how they say that your brain is still developing until you're like, 25 or whatever. Like, have I now reached a point where my brain is as it will be for the rest of my life? Have I prepared it enough? Have I been keeping it healthy enough? Have I made it intellectual enough? Have I made it, fast enough? Like, just stuff like that. Like, am I now set up to use this as the tool for the rest of my life? I don't necessarily believe like simplified descriptions of stuff like that. The brain is a very plastic thing. Neuroplasticity is like the backbone of the brain. I feel like if you have trouble doing something, understanding something, developing skills, the solution is not necessarily in trying to brute force it, it's rather trying to find a more creative solution for it, using what benefits your brain already gives you to try and discover a solution in a different way. Neurodivergent is an interesting term, but I think everyone is neurodivergent from everyone else. There's no such thing as a default template human being, certainly no such thing as a default template mind. It also occurs to me that I may be very good at understanding myself when doing these kind of self-reflection episodes, but also good at understanding the rest of humanity, in particular my audience. This obsession with always trying new things you think might be a good formula for YouTube. People want to be curious about new stuff all of the time, but maybe not so for my audience. We fall into a weird category as Blender creators because we are Blender, which is specific, creators, which is generic. So our audiences are specific generalists, I guess, if you can think about it that way. Always wanting to change is both a gift and a curse in this environment, I feel like. The solution to bridging them is, I think, a way to pique the curiosity of pre-existing audience members. I don't feel like I've been doing that in a particularly effective way, but I don't know whether I should worry too much about discovering or strategizing on the most effective ways to get the pre-existing audience members interested in the things that I want to try out. Just be yourself, as they say, the term which I've always found a bit confusing. So what are the major points we can take away here? Well, in terms of practicality for the business, should we say, finding a solution to revisiting old work is seeing it through a new lens. I suppose in a way I have been doing this successfully in the last few months in regards to Baijin, and in particular the new lens was geometry nodes. And I suppose I helped myself by completely redesigning the user interface for the add-on. It now allows for much more visual expression, and I think it's much easier to identify differences in a visual way. So that was probably a good call. In regards for the other projects, I think I'll probably have to try and take some lessons from that. I have a very visually focused mind. I always try and do things visually, provide very cool visual demonstrations. So whenever I update old projects, in particular old products, ambient grunge, modular metals, and everything else there, I'll do it in a very visually impactful way. I will also try and keep track of my sense of self, and hopefully I don't encounter any more derealization problems. I already get enough of that dread anxiety from medical issues anyway. I've even started writing personal reports for myself in regards to whenever medical issues crop up, so I can keep track of like the dates and symptoms and stuff like that. So if they return in the future, I can look back at the log and go, okay, well, your body responded to it in this way, so this is what you can expect from now on. Well, thank you for attending my personal therapy session. Maybe you found this interesting and or helpful. Maybe consider taking some time to talk to yourself about your own sense of self. And of course, I suppose, feel free to take a look at some of my other work if you're interested in seeing what I get up to. So thanks for watching or listening, and I'll see you next time.